And we're live. Welcome to another episode of the Geek Book Club, the book club for geeks, an online digital book reading circle of friends and family. We pick books that at least one of the hosts has not read, and then we read them, and then we talk about them. That's kind of what podcasting and book reviews and movie reviews and film reviews are all about. And just, with the focus of this being a little bit on the geekier side for those of the geek persuasion. As you might notice, if you're watching the live stream or the video after we're done recording, there are actually 3 windows for this podcast. Not only am I joined by my partner in crime, Andrew Wallace, giving me a little wave there. We're also joined this week by Ms. Laura Fagan, and I'd like to welcome you to the Geek Book Club.
Thank you all very much for having me, even if it is a ridiculous hour in the morning for me.
Well, it's like we really should have planned the communication on this just a little bit better. I was totally rocked this week, so I apologize because I know I was radio silent. I had, phones to review. I had laptops and desktops to tear up and rebuild, and
a new show.
And a new show.
Yeah, and a new show.
I did add a new show to the repertoire. Yeah. Probably not as big as the Geek Book Club, but you just got to give those new show producers that I'm on a little help over at Newegg. They'll figure out what's going on at some point. They'll build an audience, I'm sure. But no, so while I was sort of radio and communicado, I didn't realize that we're all in various stages of like either before or after bedtime. So we totally should have just made this the pajama podcast.
Well,
absolutely.
I'm already partway there, and it's appropriate for this podcast too.
Well, I mean, you're wearing the robe, so that's perfect. Yeah. That is literally perfect for what we're going to be talking about this week, because I was super excited when we reached out to you, Laura. I think our trick is going to be, if we have a guest, they have to bring the book, like a BYOB. Yeah, no, that works.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
okay, it still works.
You were throwing out some suggestions, and we were talking about like, oh well, we try to read books that the hosts haven't read, but then you said that you would like to bring the Hitchhiker's Guide, which I absolutely have read, but I was like, yeah, we got to read it again because Andrew hasn't read it, and I feel like he needs to be made fun of more for this book having escaped his clutches.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it was one of those things where it was on my list for a long time, and then I just made a point to avoid every incarnation of it that came until I'd read it. So now I've gotten to that point.
Well, I'm glad that we could course correct for you there. I feel like someone who has gone out of their way to avoid this book is probably made in numerous other poor life decisions.
Yeah. You guys have set me on the right path now. I'm straight now.
I'm so glad. Like, Laura, thank you from the bottom of my heart for instigating this intervention for Andrew.
This is just going to be now the rehabilitation podcast. Where we just go, no, Andrew, this. No, Andrew, this.
So
no.
you both already held up your copies. This is my, I think this is 15-year-old copy. Is that how old this is? I think. My hardback of the entire Hitchhiker series, the increasingly inaccurately named Hitchhiker's trilogy of 5 books. Laura, you've got the same hardback with the gold edition.
I do.
Oh,
it is very special to me.
It's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And
but it's
poor
gold.
Andrew with his little
my backpack book. It's the version I don't care about messing up,
I do think we should eventually work him up to getting the black hardback, and that's how he kind of graduates.
Oh no, definitely. Actually, I mean, I already spoiler alert, I think I already know what Andrew's getting for Christmas this year.
Yeah.
So Merry Christmas. So one of my all-time favorite pieces of literature, an amazing story told by a completely singular wit, and funnily enough, actually, I think one of not the first piece of media that I ever experienced from the late great Douglas Adams. Douglas Adams was a writer for part of a Tom Baker Doctor Who series, The Key to Time. And when you watch a part of that series, he was responsible for one of the gemstones in The Key to Time. And you can instantly tell, if you've ever read Hitchhiker's Guide, that there's just a certain character to the storytelling, to the voice, to the situations that the Doctor is placed in. And then you see, writing credit Douglas Adams, and you're like, oh, yes, that makes perfect sense, because only I think Douglas Adams is as adept at drawing people into such a combination of whimsy and absurdity, while also making sure that the characters, you still care very much about what the characters are going through. And it's just always such a joy to revisit that voice, because unfortunately we're just never going to hear from that voice ever again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was very well written, and the book really handled the gravity of what's happening to the characters very well, and balanced it very well with the whimsical humor. I thought, it was going to be. I was worried it was going to be a little bit over the top, but it actually handled it pretty well. And there were several points where I just was sitting here and laughed out loud, just at it. So yeah,
no, that's excellent. Okay, I'm so happy to hear that, because when I first read the book, I was probably just a little too young for it. And it, like, I enjoyed it, but I don't really think I got it. And then I revisited the book in junior high, and it was the same thing. Like, in junior high, there were moments where I was putting the book down because I was cackling so hard. Actually, you know what? Let's throw this out here before we get into plot. Because we probably should talk about the plot of the book before we start pontificating and waxing philosophical about the nature of the authorship. Laura, how did you come to find Douglas Adams or The Hitchhiker's Guide?
Well, I come from a family of very big readers. My dad was kind of pivotal in kind of me and my literacy growing up. So we would always we would take our Saturdays or our Sundays to walk around bookshops and buy new books every week. So that was how I was sort of introduced to it. And it was something that I sort of stumbled upon because Dad hadn't read it. But I stumbled upon it when I was about 12 or 13. But I was already reading well into adults stuff and getting it at that stage. So it was one of those things of myself and my dad share, quite a hardcore love of fantasy. It's sort of what we did, and then we'd kind of sit and discuss it, because we used to have Friday nights used to be our gaming night, where we'd sit and play Doom.
Oh, right on. That's excellent.
And then on Sundays we'd kind of over dinner we'd chat about books and stuff. So that was kind of how that was my childhood kind of growing up. So this was something that he hadn't read and hadn't come across, but it sort of led into my fondest memories of it are talking about sort of what it sort of alludes to, like parallel dimensions and interworld play and how the world is structured. So that's sort of where my fondest memories kind of spring out from it.
So, I mean, I think I can kind of share some of that with you, where Star Trek was this huge influence over my love of harder science fiction, and especially science fiction as metaphor for discussing social ills. But The Hitchhiker's Guide really felt like something unlocked and opened a much broader, a more fantastic, or a more dramatic, or sometimes even more melodramatic love of the absurd. And it was sort of my Rosetta Stone for getting into British comedy. There's a certain sense of wit, and there's a celebration of the underdog who never quite manages to succeed. As soon as a character's up, something undermines them or undercuts them in a way that is both tragic and hilarious at the same time. And that's not a perspective that we celebrated in American literature at the time that I was starting to get into more contemporary authors. And so understanding absurdity and understanding wit through the British perspective opened me up into an entirely new world especially of comedy, that I don't think would have been I would have appreciated as much if I hadn't fallen in love with The Hitchhiker's Guide.
It's actually funny that you mentioned that, because one of the things that struck me while I was reading it, because obviously I'm from Ireland, so we have a slightly different perspective than the English narrative that is kind of present in the book. But as I was reading it, I was conscious of you two, and I thought throughout it, I'm like, are they going to get some of the little tidbits, like particularly around tea?
Whoa! Oh no, I was on board for the tea, but again, it took me going to there's a British pub that's like actually staffed, and it's where expats go. And until I had in a proper tea service, like I really didn't understand what was going on behind tea, but I get it a little bit more, and I'm kind of a tea fiend. In fact, at some point, if we want to talk tea, Laura, you and I should have a conversation with Josh Vergara.
Okay, really?
You know, Josh, because
Yeah,
his entire shtick is tech and tea. And so
Oh.
my other tea fiend friend. Not to
Okay,
cut you out of that.
okay.
You can join us too, Andrew. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make that.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. It's tragic. I tend to be more of a coffee guy.
Oh no, I'm a coffee snob too, and I think I've perfected my perfect cold brew, but in the wide spectrum of beverages that aren't like fizzy sugar water drinks, there is a huge appreciation for a well brewed, right temperature, properly steeped cup of tea that's delivered in a cup that has been properly warmed before the tea is served, and then I do take mine with a little splash of milk because I like that little bit of fat.
This is slightly anecdotal, but I think this is really worth sharing. I went to see Game Grumps the other day. They came to Dublin.
Oh, right on.
Game Grumps, if for anybody who doesn't know, they're like a comedy video gaming series. And one of the questions in the Q&A afterwards was to Jacksepticeye, who is an expat from Ireland, and it was like lions or berries, and the whole stadium like erupted, and the Grumps were sitting there like, it's like a civil war is going to break out over tea, and we're like, you don't understand, like very like this is a very heated debate. But and the two of them, Aaron and Danny, were just standing there like, what is going on? So it was the nuance of that I really felt was kind of replicated in Hitchhiker. So I was kind of half afraid. I'm going, oh no, is this sort of thing going to go over?
I mean, to be fair, I'm sure there's still some cultural anecdotal perspectives that I'm probably not completely grasping. But
yeah,
I mean, for my entire life, having been something of an Anglophile in terms of film, there's a little of this book discussion that I'm sure I'm missing, but I think the core understanding and I think the core sympathy for every character, like let's get into the plot so we don't have to keep talking about this stuff so generically. And the story of the Hitchhiker's Guide follows an earthling by the name of Arthur Dent, who is friends with a gentleman by the name of Ford Prefect, which again is a joke that I feel is lost on many Americans because the Ford Prefect wasn't a car here in the United States where it was in the UK. And as you may have noticed, I did not call Ford an earthling because he's not. He's actually an alien from near the vicinity of the star Betelgeuse. And
don't say that 2 more times.
Yeah, no, it's like let's not mix our properties here. Yeah. Although I wouldn't mind hanging out with Michael Keaton these days. He seems like a cool dude. But one morning, Arthur wakes up to find that bulldozers are about to knock down his house, and at the same time, Ford wakes up to find out that space bulldozers are here to demolish the Earth. And instead of some kind of, I think, more American Western perspective of like, well, we've got to stop them and we've got the nukes. Basically, Ford just helps Arthur escape while the space bulldozers demolish the Earth, and the Earth is no more. And what follows from that point is a madcap, zany romp across the galaxy involving numerous other characters, numerous other alien species, different times and dimensions and space, and a sort of galactic history, which this Earthman is being exposed to, all in the settings of this great space adventure with a perfectly ordinary normal dude who's having to cope with an existence of where his home has been destroyed and all he has to show for it are his pajamas and his robe. He never even has the opportunity to get better clothes. This befalling the poor Arthur Dent, but not the late Dent Arthur Dent. So no, Andrew, please jump in.
Well, it's like, I feel like as I was reading through this, I kind of felt like this would have made, there's some reality someplace where this exists, where they actually made a film, but it's with the Monty Python cast. I feel like it would be a great Monty Python story, like the way I read it.
No, and that's what I love. So again, so many of my friends, and especially having been a theater student, so many of my friends, huge fans of Monty Python's Flying Circus. I think it was because of the Hitchhiker's Guide that when I started watching Monty Python films, that those voices were more accessible. The comedy was more accessible. There's just... I've never encountered an author like Douglas Adams in his ability to twist a sentence up, like stretch language to its absolute limits, and then convey an idea in the perfect way, the perfect sentiment to convey that idea, but it made your brain follow a structure that was totally alien. Like he was speaking a foreign language, translated it through Bing, put it through Google Translate, and then put it back into English, and it still makes sense, and it's hilarious all at the same time.
Oh, and it's written so straight-faced with it too.
Yeah.
Which is great. Like, helps to sell it, you know, especially the excruciating detail that he goes into some of these descriptions and roundabout ways of getting to it. It's a great charm that I have not found in many authors' works.
So, I mean, to get back to our love of tea, it's maybe my favorite sentence ever written in the history of literature. My love of Shakespeare, how much I love plays by Pinter, and it's Douglas Adams talking about Arthur Dent is on the spaceship, and the food machines on the spaceship will scan the species and, you know, scan the taste buds and then deliver a beverage tailor fit to them. And how does he describe it? And like every single, but regardless of what the machine scans, regardless of the alien species in front of it, it will always deliver a cup of grayish liquid, which is almost, but not quite, entirely unlike a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Because it's not even like it's just a bad double negative. It's you have to dance. It's like you have to dance through that sentence to understand exactly how terrible, but not quite terrible, it really is.
Yeah. There have been several times where I've like gone back and reread some of those just to make sure I got absorbed it properly.
Oh, definitely. I mean, this is actually, I mean, what I love about it is, for as whimsical and as absurd as it is, the book is kind of unforgiving. Like you can't just skim. You actually need to digest and, I mean, consume and digest this language. But you're so well rewarded for it. You know, I don't think I'm sharing a sentiment that's unique or I'm adding anything really special to the discussion of this book that people haven't mentioned before me, but it's just the appreciation of this author's work, I think, can't be understated. Sorry, I'm trying not to sneeze in front of the microphone.
No, you're fine.
Quick pause, time out. Okay. We did have a couple people jump into the live chat. We had Lucas from Brazil. I want to say hey to Lucas. And
hey.
Splinterific. He's Splinterific is wondering if we know where our towels are.
It's not close enough on me right now.
We're bad. We're bad hitchhikers.
Woefully unprepared.
Well, mine's in the next room, but
mine is just outside the door. So I mean, obviously, I can't pick it up and show it on camera. But
yeah,
I totally know where my towel is. So almost every piece of this book, almost every line of it, I feel is like in kind of the way that The Simpsons, you know, create so many memorable and quotable moments. There's so much of this book that is sort of the same for both my wife and I, where we can look at each other and utter half of a sentence of this book, and it means something in that moment, like in the context of what we might be dealing with in our daily lives. in a really fun and interesting way.
Oh yeah, well, that's how it transcends really, because you got. I mean, in the end, even if you took away a lot of the science fiction and fantasy elements, because I feel view this very much as like a sci-fi fantasy sort of novel.
Yeah. Oh,
And
totally. No, definitely.
oh yeah, and you can strip that all away, and it's still like, gosh, you could. I mean, it's still a human sort of story. You know, where you can strip. That's part of what makes it so good, is it's so universal, despite being ludicrous at the same time.
Oh, definitely.
So yeah.
Well, and there's just something fun to an author who's so good at poking fun of poking fun of the human condition. You know, again, there's this wonderful sentiment of the universe is infinite, so none of us are really as special as we think we are. That just permeates the entire scope of the series. And again, it's something that Douglas Adams does in a way that's like not condescending, in a way that actually does somehow still manage to celebrate that we're flawed, dumb, limited creatures, and that's a good thing. You know, like
well, it's because all of his characters are like that. Even even the ones outside of the Earth, which makes it even more so, especially when they view themselves as absolutely superior to man descended from apes. You know, like, are they really that far ahead? You know, so well, they're just great. You know, it's kind of, it just makes Arthur kind of the whipping boy of it all.
Yeah. The last human is definitely the one primed for the most abuse, and so amongst many other concepts of this book that I think are so much fun to explore, while being rescued from the Earth, Ford Prefect manages to get them into even more trouble, and they're thrown out into empty space, where we're then introduced to two of the other primary characters of the series, Zaphod Beeblebrox and Trisha McMillian, or Trillion. And Zaphod Beeblebrox is the president of the galaxy, and he has stolen. This is my favorite concept in the first book, is the Heart of Gold, this brand new, awesome, beautiful spaceship, which is powered by the infinite improbability drive. Again, a concept mathematically which just tickles my fancy to no end. But to briefly sum up, this spaceship if you can calculate how improbable something might be, you can achieve that outcome, because the ship's drive can create a field of improbability which can match an unlikely event. So it's the best way to travel through space, because you don't have to spend all that time just mucking about in hyperspace. Instead, at a certain improbability level, you can just blitz through every parsec of the galaxy at the same time and then end up exactly where you need to be, because that's kind of improbable when you think about it. So if it's something that's impossible, well, there has to be some kind of improbability calculation that you can make to it. And I could probably spend an entire hour just talking about that as a literary concept.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you bring that up immediately, because the description of how that's created and how, particularly the bit towards the end where it's just like, this person got lynched because nobody in physics likes a smartass. And that's just how it ends. It's like, because nobody likes a smartass.
It's like an entire chapter of the book to describe the history of the improbability drive, and there are physicists who, weren't invited to the good physics
parties.
And at the end, it's like one throwaway sentence, and this person was never heard from again, because everyone discovered what they really couldn't stand was a smartass.
Like that is without a doubt, like, probably my favorite description out of the entirety of Hitchhikers itself. So
one thing I'm interested in is what both of your visions, or how you imagined some of these characters when you first read it, because the audience here doesn't know, but after I finished reading the book, I also watched the 2005 film. But like that way, when I was reading the book, I didn't have any sort of preconceptions or anything.
Right. Well, Laura, I'm gonna
And-
let you take this one first because
Yeah.
my story of how I got to the book is a little long-winded. So why don't you talk before I bore our audience to death?
So this is actually going to be quite indicative of my age, but I found the books relatively at the same time as the movie.
Mhm.
Yeah, I am that young. Sorry, boys.
Oh, it's okay. I'm just kidding. I mean, this got mega creepy, but it's okay.
So it wasn't substantially longer from the time that I read the books to when the movie came out. So my notion of the characters was a bit colored.
Mhm.
Frankly, I felt like, particularly for Zaphod, like that was a brilliant piece of casting. But I think I just have a soft spot for Mos Def in
Oh.
general.
Right on.
So when it came to like the portrayal of Ford, it wasn't necessarily what I had in my head, but certainly the mannerisms and the descriptions. I sort of felt that was what sort of like I even before the podcast, like I watched the movie a few nights ago and I was just sitting back smiling, and it was just sort of and it was just still sort of nostalgic and sort of happy for me. So it wasn't one of those things of it was exactly how I imagined it in my head. It was more the spirit of it and the mannerisms of it that I felt really transferred well, rather than the actual kind of getting down to the nitty gritty of,
Right.
you know, character depictions. And I felt that that's what really carried the movie for me. So I was okay with it because I was willing to take it as in the spirit of it. It's
Right.
like the way you could be really mad at the Lord of the Rings, the movies,
Right.
if you read the
Or-
books.
I mean, or especially the Hobbit films.
Yeah.
Where they're sort of interpreting literature to create
Yeah.
that maybe didn't exist, but it kind of did.
It's like
Yeah.
inventing some, and luckily I have excised most of the memory of those out of my brain.
Well, look,
successfully, so.
there's a difference between straight up
Nerds.
lying, which is what The Hobbit does, the movies do. Like, there's a difference between straight up lying.
No, okay.
And-
No. I'm willing to go with you, Laura, because I feel like there's an important discussion to have. Okay. I'm going to reset this because I tried to achieve 3 different things. I do this every podcast. I tried to say like 5 things all at the same time in one sentence, and my brain went, that doesn't work. So you're absolutely spot on in that I should feel old, because like you, I watched The Hitchhiker's Guide before I read the books. Unlike you, I watched the 1981 BBC television show
Oh dear.
before I read the books. And I want to say, so where were we? I think the first time I saw one of the BBC TV shows, we were in Texas. So I was probably 8 or 9 when I started watching. So that would have been about 8 years after the show had originally aired. But I was about 8 or 9 and I watched them, and they're just so goofy and wacky that, and also that era of BBC TV is so phenomenal for terrible makeup, horrible lighting, cheap cameras, cardboard sets that wobble as characters walk by them. There's something so charming about that era of production, because what really mattered was the story, and that works. I mean, it actually lends an air of timelessness to some of that production, because those special effects weren't good when they originally aired, so they don't get worse over time. They just stay bad.
Yeah.
I know. Like, you could have a Doctor Who crossover at any moment, really.
Totally. Well, and again, celebrating my favorite Doctor is Tom Baker. My second favorite Doctor is Pertwee, and my third favorite Doctor is Capaldi. So I came into it that way, and then, like I said, I tried to read the book because I didn't know. I mean, this is wacky BBC TV show, and then my mom goes, "Oh yeah, there's a book." And so I think I was about 10 when I tried to read it the first time. Crash and burn. Like I read through the entire first Hitchhiker's Guide, and I remembered enjoying it. But then later, I was like 14 or 15. Oh no, like 13. I reread the book again, and just over those 3 years, like, was able to understand so much more about why it was funny and what was going on. So why I'm not super harsh on the film is because the creation of the Hitchhiker's Guide is so varied that I think it's okay to have these sort of weird tangent interpretations of it, because it started out as a radio drama. The scripts were then rewritten to be a book. The book doesn't match the radio drama. And then there is another variation of the story written, which is pulled directly from the radio drama. And then the BBC TV series sort of mashes up Hitchhiker's Guide and The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. And then after that point is when we get the other books in the series. So I didn't think it was really fair for the people that were hypercritical of the 2005 film to say, well, it's not like the book, because that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
There are so many different incarnations, all approved by Douglas Adams, that you can call the Hitchhiker's Guide, that it's okay if there's something different. Now, where I am going to differ with you, Laura, just a little bit, obviously, is I had a decade relationship with that book before the movie came out. So my perception colored by the original BBC TV show, my experiences with sort of reading the books on my own, and what I eventually sort of took for those characters to resemble, there was just a huge barrier for me getting into the film. I just imagine Ford as having sort of a manic personality. So there's nothing against Mos Def, because I think Mos Def is a phenomenal performer, but that's not the Ford prefect that I had in my head. You know, that's not the idea of Ford. But I think maybe the one thing that I think doesn't work for the 2005 film is Sam Rockwell's portrayal of Zaphod.
Right there,
Andrew.
I
agrees with me on that point. Andrew, go on.
Well, okay, so you know how he's described as having two heads, and throughout the book, you know, he's one head looking one way, or you know, kind of around. I envision him as and I hate to mention this film, but I envision him. Do you guys remember in Star Wars Episode 1,
God,
the pod racing announcer guy who's like, "Oh, there goes Quadranaro's power cup," that's what I imagined kind of the Beaver box to look like.
I really need you to acknowledge the fact that Laura and I are motionless.
I think we just had that moment where we just didn't know where you were going to go with that. So.
Oh no, he's bringing up the Phantom Menace.
Yeah. I know.
Oh no.
I know. I started sweating as I was thinking about it, but
I do remember that CG creation as brought to us by LucasArts.
Yes. Well, okay, and the way that they portrayed Sam Rockwell's portrayal, and I don't think it was so much. There was some of the writing that they kind of changed, but a lot of physically, how is I thought it was cheap how they kind of did his head. It was a cheat to have his head just put some green screen under your chin, and it was also 2005 CG that wasn't that great when it interacted with people, so I just didn't sell it to me at all, really.
So I mean, I appreciate. I mean, again, the structure of the character, because if you're coming at this from having read the book first, you spent time creating and envisioning a character. I think my problem with the 2005 film for Zaphod is just a little more philosophical, in that I think they're making an obvious commentary on the presidency of George W. Bush. And there's a timelessness to the novel Hitchhiker's Guide, but there's something that I feel dates the film. It locks it to a film of that era as a cultural reference, which 30, 40 years from now, if someone picks up this film and they watch Sam Rockwell's performance, what are they going to relate that to? You know, that's not going to be part of the cultural zeitgeist.
I don't necessarily agree. So,
but I bring it up.
Well, I'm coming at this from a perspective of I am still in my early 20s, right? So when George W. Bush was a thing, I wasn't necessarily fully cognizant at that stage of existence. So for me, when it came to that performance, I was 100% bought into it, because I can relate this to the ridiculousness and the charisma of being sort of brought up in the 2000s and having certain pinned archetypes throughout that, and how purely growing up in this era, you are exposed to such kind of charisma that is then used to some sort of ill. So that doesn't. So I don't think that that performance necessarily won't transcend itself. I think there will always be archetypes in which you can pin that there is always that Zaphod in something.
Well, but this is something that I think Doctor Who does phenomenally well. Whenever the Doctor is faced with bureaucracy or politics, there is something. I mean, like, to your point, they're doing something where they're referencing usually something that's kind of shady or ugly about politics. I think you can always point to Sam Rockwell's portrayal as being, there's a charismatic sort of vapid politician figure in front of you. But I feel that the producers of the film did have a certain politician as a target for that, which resonated more for those people who were kind of tapped into that 2005 experience in kind of the same way that if I didn't know anything about tea, there would be parts of this book that would be lost on me, or at least just the cultural appreciation that the British have for a good, strong cup of tea.
Also,
so I just feel like there's something on the nose about that as a target, which that doesn't feel like it comes from the estate of Douglas Adams. That feels like it comes from a bunch of producers who feel they're really clever. And while Sam Rockwell's performance is great, I'm a huge fan of Sam Rockwell, that to me felt like that was off message or off character for the rest of the story in ways that I feel like so much more of the film gets the spirit right, overlooking other opportunities to pin the film to its time, to its calendar. So that's just my opinion. I don't know. That could be full of crap.
I guess one of the things where I also come from a slightly different angle too, and something that maybe for US audiences this might be a bit of good context to share. There was a comedy that ran in the UK for a long time called Only Fools and Horses. Do either of you two know of that show?
That one I don't know.
So there is a character archetype which is very Sam Rockwell, Zaphod-esque, called Del Boy. So he's very extravagant, but he's a con man. And so, but he goes through these whole kind of multiple personality kind of traits, and he's a carpenter one day, he's trying to swindle some old ladies the next, and I can see a lot of that portrayal of Del Boy in this particular portrayal of that, which would probably appeal to older English audiences as well, who grew up with that stage of comedy. So I don't think, while it more than likely is a certain underpinning of that for from a political perspective, there is also that background of that sort of comedy too that was particularly prevalent in England in around the 90s and 2000s that I don't think should be kind of left out of the discussion either.
Yeah, but I didn't watch it, so I don't think that's.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't make it invalid though. One
is that something that's common these days in British television? That archetype.
I don't watch that much British telly anymore. But it was what I was subjected to when I was young.
But later, I think there are numerous sort of examples of sort of posh and vapid. Like I would say if you watch anything that like Matt Berry performs in, he takes it to, again, we're talking absurd, and then we're talking absurd for British absurdity. Like he takes it to this completely unhinged place of being sort of a vapid or vapid posh kind of role where it's a position of power, usually over other underlings that are more of the Arthur Dent style characters in the story. I think one of the more accessible examples would probably be his the boss he plays in the IT Crowd. Again, a completely ridiculously unhinged character, but for me, that more closely resembles the British notion of a Zaphod that I had in my head.
Yeah.
10 years before the film came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, again, that's kind of where I was coming from in those in terms of those kinds of characters. But then you can take a look at like what's her name? Zooey Deschanel as
Trillian.
And she was spot on. I mean, she was perfect for what I imagined that character would be. And you can't do better than Martin Freeman as Arthur Dent.
Yeah.
I mean, he played that role so geniusly, and characters similar to that role. I mean, in the original, The British Office, is so accessible, so likable, and again, just the perfect, whipping boy for other characters to take advantage of.
Yeah.
Martin Freeman's subtlety about that, playing those type of characters, is pretty unmatched. I feel like just the way he could take those slights and just kind of, you can see that moment of just like pure loathing, and then whatever, it just goes off and goes on to the next thing, I mean,
because the acceptance of it, that's what's so terrible is, again, you're kind of like looking at an abused puppy, but an abused puppy that understands its place in the universe, and it sort of just kind of resigned itself to, this is my role, this is my life now. So,
well, everyone else that's left in the universe is telling him that,
Right. I love it so much. It's so good. It's so good. I understand why. I guess it's, I always got a little salty that the film is so reviled. You get like a bunch of people like angrily commenting online. But if, it's, to me, like, I want to be that OG fan who's like, well, did you watch the BBC version? No, then shut up. Have you listened to the BBC radio broadcasts? No. Well, you're not a real fan. Gatekeeper, ban.
Yeah.
So yeah. I while I definitely, obviously, I have some criticisms. I mean, even Bill Nighy as Slarty Bartfast.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, like, that's kind of genius. That's right on what I imagine in my head for those kinds of characters. Like, so much of the film, they get so much of the film right.
And oh gosh, Alan Rickman as Marv. Marv. Like, I mean, I envisioned him as more like kind of a Star Warsy droid, but it worked out really well. And just the way that was absolutely the perfect voice.
Oh,
for
absolutely.
that melancholy of a character, just masterful. That's also just out the power of Alan Rickman, anyway, too. Like, he could play like a deer on planet Earth's thoughts, and it would be awesome, So
I really hope that no one has mentioned this. That I hope that someone has recorded Alan Rickman phonetically speaking every syllable of the alphabet, so that sometime in the future, with like this Adobe program that can like replicate human voices, like, we can feed Alan Rickman back in, and I won't be deprived of him, like, I don't know, doing audiobooks or something.
I feel like the name Bixby is just British enough to have his voice.
Right. Well, first of all, no, bad. Nope. Don't bring Bixby into this conversation. We need to veer off into smartphones. I've talked about that enough today. 2, no, bad. That's terrible.
I wasn't kidding. This will be the rehabilitation podcast.
This Juan needs some therapy now.
Yeah.
Because he's referring to himself in the third person. This is terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it will be a sad day when I can get my like GPS turn-by-turn directions from Alan Rickman posthumously. But I still kind of want that a little bit. So,
who doesn't want?
This is from Panzer Z watching in the live chat. If they can do it for the Star Trek computer voice, Majel Barrett Roddenberry, rest in peace. They can do it for Alan friggin' Rickman. Now, fun story, not a fun story, kind of a sad story, but also kind of a heartwarming story. So Andrew, remind me, Majel Barrett passed away during the first.
During the first one, because that was, you had the Chekhov saying the Wessel thing, and there was that whole joke, and that's where they had her in that scene in the 2009 Star Trek.
I believe there is one additional computer, like it's faintly in the background. It's not like featured or highlighted in the film, but they needed a pickup for that. And I actually know the woman who had to go. And like it was amazing listening to her tell the story of like having to carry the mantle of the Star Trek computer voice. She's this really well-respected voice actress, and like
Oh wow.
it's again like only someone who had that kind of appreciation could also then like know what it was that she was doing in just doing this one barely audible line of dialogue in a film.
Oh,
So
that's awesome. Oh man,
Yeah.
I never knew that.
yeah,
Glad to do
if
that.
Emily later after the podcast, we don't need to dig into the Star Trek. But if I can remember, I'll try and pull it up where I can actually play part of the audio for you. But that's not important right now. We've got a from Splinterific. He brought up recently a quick side note. I think he's calling you out here, Laura. So if we need to get into some YouTube drama and some fighting, we can. Ireland rejected the international standard for tea making recently because people put milk in first, which is wrong. Laughy face emoticon.
That's an inside joke. Splinter, shut up.
I don't know. I mean, like, Laura, do the Irish put the milk in before the tea? Because that does sound wrong to me.
It depends. It depends on who's making it.
Your
The thing
voice is getting higher pitched and you're
it doesn't.
speaking more rapidly.
Well,
I feel like you're getting defensive.
It depends on where you come from, and he shouldn't talk because he knows where he lives. Like,
I feel like we've crested into the third era of therapy on this podcast.
Yeah.
And I feel it has to do with the Irish and their filthy tea drinking habits.
Prepare to get a lot of hate in the comments now on for that statement. Yeah. This will now, the comments will now just be filled with the different descriptions of tea, and it will be nothing about hitchhikers.
Real quick, I mean, just a tangent. I have found it's like a chain from Teavana, and I'm sad that Teavana is bought out by Starbucks and they'll probably disappear. But there's this lovely chai oolong blend that they mix up, and it smells like almost like a tea cider. It's become one of my favorites. What are you just sort of a standard black tea drinker? Do you like a green tea? What do you...
So this is where I'm a heathen, right? Because in Ireland, if you ask, there is only one tea, right? There is only one tea that you do not like. Green tea doesn't exist. Like, if you talk to anybody who's Irish, if you go to somebody's house and the first thing you want is a cup of tea, you will always be offered what you guys would call a breakfast tea.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like a black tea. I'm sure Splinter will tell me otherwise if it's not actually a black tea or not. So personally, I'm green and herbal. So but like anybody who kind of, they're like, okay, do you want some tea? And I'm like, do you have any herbal tea? And it's like, herbal, like.
Well,
no.
all I gotta say is, and this is something that I feel like that you and I can share a laugh. Again, to be culturally insensitive.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we were out at IFA, and Josh, so someone who also cares very much about his tea. We were at a fancy dinner, and they're bringing out tons of wine and sugary beverages, and just like he just wanted a cup of tea, just like something that wasn't like gonna get him drunk, because you just spend so much time drinking at these events, and like he wanted something to back off. And so he asks the waiter, and I mean, so this is in Berlin, do you have any teas? And you're like, well, we have a ginger tea. And he's like, oh, well, that sounds delicious. Yeah, I would love to have a glass of ginger tea. And so they bring him a cup of boiling water with a couple chunks of ginger in it. And that was their tea. And so I posted a picture of this on Twitter, and like most people are properly offended by this presentation, but we had like 2 or 3 people that were like, oh no, I mean, like, you just steep stuff in water, that's what tea is. And both Josh are like, no, that's not.
Just believe you gotta earn your tea, you know.
but apparently that in the way that, you know, people from your area, general vicinity, the islands around you have very particular ideas on tea that are also, I think, somewhat influenced by that region's hold over other areas of the world, like the East India Tea Company. The Germans, apparently, you just put stuff in water, what is boiling, and that what makes a cup of tea. And I'm always going to get a good chuckle out of German ginger tea.
In my experience, that is the exception rather than the rule. But I can imagine Joshua's just having the same reaction I'm currently having, which is no.
Yeah, no, you're rightfully offended. And again, if you're not watching this on the YouTubes, you were just listening to the audio version of this podcast. She is like Picard,
sinking lower
face
lower,
in hand, deflating as we can describe. From @Panzer Z in the live chat, he remembers the ginger tea episode, but I was one of those just steep stuff in water people, you heathen. But on that note, are you a cereal first or milk first kind of person, Laura? If you put your milk in before your tea, do you also measure your milk before you eat your cereal?
You see, that's a difficult question, because then that leads on to the Weetabix discussion, and that is sort of like tea. So this is getting like terribly complex. Like, so there
you brought up Weetabix.
Yeah. So do you guys even have Weetabix in the States?
No!
They're like so Weetabix is a wheat-based breakfast cereal which come in bars. and it is a widely discussed thing as to whether or not it's hot milk or cold milk, or which goes in first, or how much milk do you put in the Weetabix, because some people just like a splash and others like it to completely dissolve. So that's an entire discussion in and of itself as to what's right, let alone do you put like toppings on it. So like
have wars been started over this?
I really feel like they have.
Oh, like this another, we need to have like a spin-off podcast on this, which is just the breakfast podcast where we
So what did you eat for breakfast? You're doing it wrong.
Wrong. Yeah. That'll be our tagline. Breakfast, you're doing it wrong.
From Splinterific, Douglas Adams would be proud of this conversation.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, we should probably get back to the book. So Andrew, I'm actually going to have to throw to you on this, because like the fanboy that I am, we said we were only going to read the first book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And as soon as I was done with that, because it's all right here in this one great tome, I just went right on into Restaurant at the End of the Universe. And so I kind of wanted to get a sense from you. We finished this book. You know that there's significantly more story afterwards, but where the story leaves you off, you got there. How did you feel getting to that point? And if you can just help us refresh, we'll technically call this spoilers, but not really. And a lot of people that are watching this have probably already read the book too. So if you don't want to know how the first book ends, then I don't know, skip this part. But you're probably already on board anyway.
I'll say, going through, I mean, overall, it felt a lot like it was enough of a self-contained story, but left it open at the end, kind of like, say, a Star Wars A New Hope sort of thing, where, that's kind of where you can kind of, they have some open things including stuff with Beeble Brox. Yeah, that's how you say it. Okay. With him, as far as what he's done to himself that they mentioned earlier, and along with, the actual question, for the meaning.
We should bring that up. That okay, we're just gonna go into spoilers. So Earth has been destroyed. The reasons probably not that important why, but what we come to discover is that the Earth isn't just a planet of happenstance where evolution, created life forms all on its own. What we come to discover is that the Earth is actually I should say, because it's been destroyed. The Earth was a giant computer built to not answer the ultimate question of life.
Yeah, they had that answer already.
They already had the answer, but they didn't actually know what the question of life, the universe, and everything is. And again, in a part of the book that I will celebrate, just like almost every other part of the book, and say it's like one of my favorites, but literally the book is, every page of this book is like one of my favorite pieces of literature. A giant supercomputer is built. These people go up to the computer and say, we want you to find the answer to life, the universe, and everything. The ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. And over a course of millions of years, that computer works and works and works on the answer, and it arrives at the answer of 42.
Much to the chagrin of the society that built this computer.
Much to the chagrin of the society, because that doesn't really mean anything to anyone. So when they confront that computer says, well, that's the answer, but what's the question? You didn't really ask me what the question to the answer of the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is. So I can't find that question for you, but I can help you build the computer that can find the question to the answer of the question of the ultimate, life, the universe, and everything, which is 42. And that so happens to be the Earth. It's a giant organic computer system. And minutes before that computer was going to give out its final readout, deliver the question to the ultimate answer of life, the universe, and everything, it is, of course, destroyed. And so our adventurers, Ford, Arthur, Trillian, Marvin, and Zaphod, are flying around in a spaceship that can kind of do anything, and they take it to this planet, which is built on an economy of making other planets, and it turns out they were the ones responsible for actually manufacturing the Earth. Kind of like how, like HTC used to be an ODM, like they would make a phone, but then slap another label on it. The Magrathians constructed the Earth, but to the design of this other supercomputer. So, they didn't design the Earth. They just built it. And from there, then we see that Zaphod actually has other motives for stealing the spaceship. And I've actually kind of forgotten now already, even though I just read the book, where they actually leave off on the Hitchhiker's Guide. What is the final wrap up?
Well, they're basically saying here while I'm cheating and I got it's basically they're gonna go get a quick bite at the restaurant at the end of the universe. Then they're like, let's go.
Oh no, I mean, I knew that part because the second book is called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, but
that makes sense.
Oh right. They're trying to escape. Oh, hold on. Because I'm actually gonna pull the book up. Is there anything to say? The Vogon.
I remember now. Yeah. So the space police came down and had them kind of cornered. Yeah. This is one of those parts where I laughed out loud. Probably one of my absolute favorite parts. They have these cops they kind of go out of their way to show hey, I made a novel. I'm just all this sort of stuff. Well,
no, they're sensitive cops, Andrew.
Yeah, they're sensitive cops. Yes.
They're not the kind of cops that go around murdering people and then bragging about it in space bars. Right. They're the kind of cops that go around murdering people and then agonizing over it to their girlfriends and their wives at home.
Yeah, well, and these are also methane breathing cops, and they're all cornered, and then they drop dead. You're like, what? And subtext also and they go up and they end up going back to the ship and they find Marvin, who is this irredeemably depressed robot, and he plugged into their spaceship's computer and convinced
he was bored and he just wanted someone to talk to.
Right. Yeah.
And then he convinced the other computer inadvertently to kill itself, and thus killing
everybody else, all of the management systems for the other cops and everything. And again, there's just something so gloriously, beautifully tragic about a character like Marvin, the depressed, paranoid android.
Yeah.
Again, only I can't think of another author that has tapped into the human condition so well that he can write a story about these adventurers, and one of them is a robot. And there's this notion. So like think about what we're going through today. We've got phones that talk to you. We're looking at, like machine learning algorithms, and artificial intelligence is like right around the corner in a meaningful sense, not just like, you can get better turn-by-turn directions when you voice chat with your phone.
Right.
And we're all sort of like either terrified of some sort of Terminator style future, or we're like, really excited about some kind of artificial intelligence. And everyone's so hyper focused on human level intelligence with human personalities. In 1979, Douglas Adams wrote a story about how bad an idea it would be to put a human personality on an artificial machine, on an artificial being.
Well, they even talk about how the company that thought up that, and how like
the Sirius Cybernetics Corporation.
Yes, and they found out through like some sort of time dilation, whatever, how in the future, after the apocalypse happened, they were the first ones to die.
Yeah, the first jerks against the wall when the revolution.
Yeah.
So great. And again, for the travesty of like, I have created something that has human emotions, and I have given it a personality, and it hates everything about life. It is perpetually and eternally tortured for my having created it. Like a lesser science fiction story would be something like Alien Covenant, right?
Yeah.
Right? So you've got these androids that have human creativity and are starting to border on human level intelligence with human emotions, and they can't explore that concept half as well as the throwaway joke of Marvin, the depressed robot in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's so amazing watching how some of these concepts have been so much better explored. I mean, like, I think the good version of hard science fiction would be something like HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I brought the story up a lot because I'm a huge fan of Arthur C. Clarke. But the funny version of HAL is Marvin.
Yeah. The funny, slightly less murdery version for the most part.
No, way more murdery.
I don't know.
More characters die around Marvin than around Hal.
Well, like I didn't get at the end of the book, I did not get the sense that it was purposeful, but that was part of the charm, that just because he's so depressive that he'll get anyone to try and kill themselves if they talk to him long enough.
And I think it's also
Marvin has a higher body count. Marvin wins. I'm sorry, Laura. Go ahead.
I do think just to kind of tone the silliness back very slightly is I think it's also like it's an utmost testament to the writing that something that does have such a level of severity about it can hold the humor and the weight of that in such a fine balance. Yeah. Because with anybody else, the mention of that would have been really jarring if it was any less well crafted.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? So, and I just think that's something really important, because while we're kind of giggling at it, I think it's important to reiterate that it works in the context in which it's set in. And and unless you kind of have that appreciation for it, it can come across quite flippant. While it's a deliberate, drawn kind of choice within that narrative that plays to it really well. And I think that even to talk about that, like, I don't know if you'd be able to get away with something like that today.
I think, well, definitely not in the same way, and especially in ways that I feel like some people, we were kind of talking about young adult literature earlier before we really kind of jumped into this podcast, and there's a certain type of, like, I think, social commentary where this book would be very difficult to write today if it hadn't existed before. Solely because I think you need to be critical of bad ideas in a way that's playful and fun. And right now, I just think we're all a little keyed up. The tensions are really high around some of these ideas, and it's very difficult to kind of express nuance through comedy in a way, like you were saying, that doesn't read as flip or as insensitive
Yeah.
to someone out there who would now publicly go out to crusade against a piece of literature like that. But I think to its benefit, like let's say Douglas Adams were just starting his career today, I believe that his genius and his wit would continue, in that everything that I've read from him, we're talking about these things like these wacky shenanigans and these one-off jokes, like you were saying, in any other author's hands would be distracting one-off jokes.
Yeah.
But Douglas Adams is so unerringly consistent in subverting expectation that it's not that there's just this moment where something absurd happens. It's the entire context is completely ridiculous and absurd. And then he puts some fairly realistic characters in the middle of it. So everything works towards subverting what is expected of normal people in a situation like this from another piece of literature. So, talking about bureaucracy, and you've got people in bulldozers on Earth trying to knock down Arthur Dent's house. Then you've got Vogons in space bulldozers trying to destroy the Earth. I mean, like, he's able to completely craft, like, you would expect our first encounter with an alien species to be some kind of monumental or meaningful or beautiful or scary event. But no, it's just kind of a normal space bureaucracy and eminent domain, so we got to knock your house down. Eminent domain, so we got to blow up your planet. There's no malice. There's no Will Smith, welcome to Earth, and punching out an alien. There's nothing like that. It's you have an expectation of what First Contact's going to be like, and he completely subverts it with something that is completely accessible to people, because we read about this kind of stuff in the paper every day.
Yeah.
Oh, did Andrew just freeze on us?
I think so. Very slightly, it seems.
What?
He's also kind of leaning kind of roguishly too.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Or else that was some serious pondering.
Like, can you guys hear me?
I think you just kind of, I can hear you now. You just came back.
Oh, you guys didn't pause for me at all. Well, luckily I wasn't posing in an embarrassing pose there, hopefully.
Why is he picking his nose? I mean, we're broadcasting.
Yeah. Well, one thing I really do enjoy about the whole Demolition duality is how, they both, posted, you look at the notice. Well, like, the notice was in the basement. Well, basically the same thing. It's just the perfect mirroring of it at the beginning in almost every way.
But you didn't go out of your way to call attention to it. He's like, yes, but it was on display. Oh, yes, in the Planning Commission, which is in the basement.
You guys haven't achieved interstellar travel yet? Don't complain to me about that.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, if you can't be bothered to take an interest in your local affairs, then that's on you. The plans are on display at Alpha Centauri. That's like 4 light years away. What's wrong with it?
That's so close to you guys. Come on now.
So I have to admit, like, I don't know The Hitchhiker's Guide as a story unto itself. I think I've only ever read them as the complete series, all the way through Mostly Harmless, 5 books and a short story about Zaphod. So you didn't seem to feel, Andrew, that kind of hampered the enjoyment of, I think, this first piece of the adventure.
Yeah, no, not really. Like, I really, I mean, it did end kind of suddenly, but it wrapped it up enough, but left the strands for continuation really satisfyingly to me. Like, it wasn't like cliffhanger, leaving so many things hanging. There's just a few things, and they could build on with it that it really handled quite well. Yet it managed to be satisfying at the end of the arc of this particular book, of this first foray into the universe. So yeah, it was great. Like, I loved it. And also, I love the ending to this much better than the ending to the 2005 film. Like,
you just seem so wounded by this movie.
Well, it's like, my problem was about the whole building the Earth. Like, they built the Earth, and then they had, like, they even like it was production stuff that got me with it, like painting the mountains, but then just kind of popping one up, or later, or having like you made the people, like why would they even care, like, because at the very end, like they recreated the people too, and I'm like, it was better having the Earth still be gone in the book.
Well, but that's where.
Okay.
There's more books.
It'd make sense.
Okay. Okay, cool. I got some stuff to look forward to then.
Yeah, you got some reading to do.
Yeah, got some stuff to be doing.
I guess I don't want to spoil it for you, but I know that like the tens of people who are gonna watch or listen to this are like, bro. More stuff happens.
I'm so excited now. The fact that I'm gonna be surprised with these as I read them. So.
But
Yeah.
I actually think what could be kind of a fun experiment is getting through the series and then maybe going back and watching the film again. I don't know if I want to do that to you. Just you didn't seem to enjoy it, but there are a few things that, again, the movie is in keeping with some of the spirit of where the books go, and like the radio dramas before it, there's almost sort of a mashup effect that happens with certain story elements that just aren't in the same places that they used to be. So we'll see.
Yeah,
but I mean, at least happy to see like that you're. I mean, you seem like you're interested in at least continuing to read the series.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'd like to watch some of the older works too. Well, with it, one thing I will say with the film, like the art direction, what I really loved a lot, like the Heart of Gold. I actually preferred the film's depiction of the ship than what I had in my brain, which was just kind of not really like fully formed as well. So like,
you were imagining something like the Enterprise. We know.
Well, yeah, so yeah, pretty much. No, it was kind of a boxy sort of thing in my mind, but yeah, it was but I don't know, like I had a lot of the art direction was really distinct in the film that I really enjoyed. It was, and so a lot of the performances were really good. It's just some production stuff bothered me, and a couple of writing tidbits bothered me, but it sounds like I hate it, but I don't really hate it. So
I mean, I was really shocked when you were like Twitter DMing me while like watching it about how you wanted to hunt down the producers and the directors. I just thought it was grossly inappropriate.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here.
I really didn't want that on my Twitter because, like, the NSA is probably listening to this. This is terrible. I don't want to be a party to some sort of conspiracy to like wipe out the producers on the Hitchhiker's Guide film. I don't know, maybe start with like a sternly worded letter. And
just have Marvin, or have Marvin read it to them, or to Vortigern, like read it in poem form.
Yeah, Vogon torture poetry.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
it's as you said, it's a product of its time.
You see, you say you don't hate it, but if you're willing to transcribe it into Vogon poetry, I think that might teeter towards hatred. Just saying.
And I'm just saying, I think you could only be this emotionally attached to something that you actually loved. You have such strong feelings about it. I feel like it's opposite sides of the same coin. So
I loved this book. Yeah, thank you guys for recommending it, because this was just spectacular experience.
Well, and thank you for bringing it up, Laura, because like I find like there seems to be a 3-year cycle where I absolutely need to go back through and reread the entire series again, and it kind of just fit in perfect with just I hadn't read it in a while and I needed to rectify that.
Yeah, no, you guys are very, very welcome.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So, Andrew, you have homework, man, because you need to finish these other books. And I don't know, we might need to do a Hitchhiker's Guide completion podcast, like having finished all of them.
So am I.
Yeah, that'd be yes, absolutely. Like let's do it.
All right. Well, in that case, I'll send you your Christmas gift early then.
Yeah. At least it won't be wasted on him.
Right.
It's like actually, I think my family actually has. My mother actually has a copy with all of them. I think too. Back in
no, everyone needs their own. I mean, I'm already shopping like what version I want to get Lex. So she's 2. The Galaxy.
Oh, here, I'll send you my one disposable one.
No.
Her own copy.
I don't think you appreciate just how much thought has gone into this of going, how am I going to introduce it? She has to love it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I come from a family of like engineers and scientists and school teachers, and again, kind of similar to what you were talking about. We love playing like board games, family board games, and we talk about what books we're reading. The book that we brought last week, my sister recommended because she's probably better read than I am, and when Lex was born, we asked for books, little board books, and Goodnight Moon, and Spooky Pooky and stuff like that. And so my Aunt Brie, who's an English teacher, my mom, my sister, all started finding like Wuthering Heights, the board book, Sense and Sensibility, the board book, made out of cardboard so your kid can gnaw on them, but Pride and Prejudice. Awesome. Here you go. She's got like the collected works of Jane Austen as board books alongside like Peter Rabbit.
Yeah.
Benjamin Bunny.
That's awesome.
And so yeah. I need to find Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The board book.
Hold on. Yeah.
Just don't confuse the orders. Just don't accidentally send that to Andrew.
Yeah. No, right. Or
I didn't see it on Amazon. Sorry, I looked.
Oh no! I've been keeping it. I really feel like I need to reach out to the estate of Douglas Adams and say, hey, you're missing a huge opportunity for getting consumers in early on your properties. And I would like to illustrate it for you if possible. Here's my work from Microsoft Paint.
Yeah.
So we should probably wrap this up because I kind of feel like anything else that we say, I'm gonna go off the deep end talking about Restaurant at the end of the universe and all that fun stuff. So we probably
that has to be saved for another podcast anyway.
Indeed,
it does.
It's to be continued.
But yes. I really feel like after having now finished the first one, we all need to come back together and do another show just to wrap it all up because not only does the story go in some interesting places, again, I feel like you can't separate art from the artist. And by the time we get to the completion of this story, in fact, we might even want to do not only the complete Hitchhiker's Guide, but what is the there's a book that was published after Douglas Adams passed with some of his news articles. I don't think it's not like So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, but it's something like that.
Was it And Another Thing novel? Looks like there's Mostly Harmless and Another Thing, which was in 2009 was when it came out.
Let me see. It's not Last Chance to See. I don't think it's And Another Thing. Because that's not Douglas Adams. That's someone else sort of adding to the Douglas Adams mythos. Damn it, I can't remember the name of this book. It's gonna drive me crazy.
Is it oh here, I think I just about saw it. Was it like the Titanic, Douglas Adams Starship Titanic?
No, it's not a fiction story. It's literally just like articles that he had written. Wow, this is really going to drive me nuts. And it's a horrifically sad book to read because again, it's like you get this sense of like the voice that we lost after he passed away. But damn it, I'll send you that one too. But at the end of that, there's sort of a cutting, sort of a rough draft of what would have been another Dirk Gently novel, which could have been converted into another Hitchhiker story. Because Douglas Adams as an author started to go into something a little darker by the time, spoilers, by the time we get into the last book of the Hitchhiker's trilogy. So again, it's just like there's so many pieces and parts and moving elements and things, and we won't ever know how these things could have been completed because the voice who created them wasn't able to complete them before he passed. But I feel like there's something to talk about there as we talk about like sort of the journey that the author went through at the same time as he's creating these adventures for his characters. So that was a really rambling way to get at something that we probably won't do. But
it's good. It's since I've been opened up to this, it's great to have the sheer amount of works just brought in and for me to absorb.
Right.
I can't wait to finish the series and discuss it with you guys again. And be properly educated, be re-educated, as it were.
Yeah.
And none of this like half-ass crap, Andrew. Come on.
Get back on the straight and narrow, Andrew. Back on the straight and narrow.
I'm on the right path for life now.
Well, I'm glad that we've set you straight. So that's the thing. Let's go ahead and wrap this up proper. Laura, where can people catch what you are working on currently, what you're going to be working on? Your Twitter handle is at Ms. Laura Fagan. You've got a lower third, unlike my co-host.
You can also find some of my bloggy type stuff at myspecious.com, and you can also find what I do on YouTube at Should You Care.
Oh, right on. Oh, the Should You Care series. Yes, I have enjoyed your videos on Should You Care.
They're great videos.
Andrew, what are you up to these days when you're not like helping us co-host the Pocket Now podcast?
Oh yeah,
I know.
Podcast and
thank you for having me on that. By the way, stuff. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, there's I'm gonna admit one of my dreams to do. It was great.
Take off the bucket list.
Yes. Right on.
Yeah. You guys can catch me on Twitter. I'm here's my lower third.
So sad.
It works. Well, there, I can just wrap it around my head, and then we're set for it. But but yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Fat Produce. You can wherever Star Trek GIFs are, you can find me. I'm sure. Pretty much doing that. I'm a boring guy.
No,
you are not.
Not in the slightest.
Not even a little bit.
Be podcasting with a boring individual. The Salmon of Doubt. The book is called The Salmon of Doubt, and it's actually a collection of his news article, not news, like magazine articles, and then there's a part of an unfinished novel at the end of that. I got it before we kicked off. I am, of course, at SomeGadgetGuy on Twitter and Instagram. I am. I'll be kicking into some cell phone stuff next week. Working on Pixel reviews for Pocket Now, some headphone reviews for some Gadget Guy. We're resurrecting another episode of my old movie review show, Movies You May Have Missed. We recovered another episode. It's taken us a long time to find them all and to get them uploaded. And I just started a new show with Newegg. So newegg.com. You can catch me and Trisha Hirschberger on Newegg Now, which is a fun live show that we're going to be putting together every week talking about cool tech deals. But it's that time of the show where we've got to talk about what we've got coming up next week. I think it's only fair, Andrew, that because I was able to school you so flipping hard on this book, that you've got to, Turnabout is going to be fair play, and that you'll be bringing a book next week that you have read that I have not read. And that book is...
Oh, yeah. That book for next month is Leviathan Wakes, the first book in the Expanse series.
So I'm gonna reach out, if you don't mind, if I'm not stepping on your toes. I believe that some of the Board at Work crew are really big fans of the Expanse series. So if you don't mind, I might reach out to them and see if they would like to join us.
Yeah. Well, like that's actually how I heard that you hadn't read it. Was I was watching one of their podcasts and they were talking about it. You're like, have you seen the show? And you're like, no, I haven't. That blew my mind because it's one of the best science fiction shows on television right now. And it's interesting too, because with the show, with like the writers of the novels are actually integral in the production of the show and the writing of the show. So it's a pretty faithful adaptation, for being a show. But just the fact that this universe is so believable is just something is one of the highlight things for me.
Well,
in that. So I
keep it in
cannot
pants,
wait,
man. Save it for next month. We actually
I can't wait to have
have
your
to
insight.
read it, and then we can talk about it, and you can
Yeah.
like, oh, I love this book so much. I'm Andrew Wallace. Yeah. But we'll get to that. After I get this episode cut up and the audio version produced, we will have a post on SomeGadgetGuy.com where you can see the books that we've got coming up. In fact, we even have the book following. So our November book is going to be Leviathan. Our December book is going to be Little Brother by Cory Doctorow. So through the end of the year, we have the next 2 books that we're going to read. I'll put those together, put them up on the website. I should probably make like a proper calendar. But for all of you folks who were joining us in the live chat, we got a couple people that mentioned us on Twitter. We saw some fun conversation just happening. We really want this to be interactive. We're going to tell you the book ahead of time so you can read it. You can join the conversation just like us. I don't know that I'll have time to get to both the Expanse book and the series, the TV series, but I do want to check out the book because I've heard some amazing things. And then when we get to that discussion, we can all join in and chat about some amazing literature, some of our favorite stories, and some of our favorite storytellers. So Geek Book Club here on my YouTube channel. You can catch the audio version. I'll have a link where you can subscribe to the podcast if you want to listen to the audio version. And then you can see our calendar of upcoming books on SomeGadgetGuy.com. Andrew, as always, I want to thank you for helping me pilot this crazy, leaky, sinking ship of a podcast. And Laura, thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call it a night. I'm going to say for Laura, I'm going to call it a morning. And I hope you'll join us next month on the Geek Book Club.